Welcome to a Talmud Israeli production. Today we'll review the highlights of this week's course of Daf Yomi study, Masechet Ta'anit, pages 30 and 31, and Masechet Megillah, pages 2 through 6. Daf Lamed. All those commandments which are applicable during the period of mourning, during Shiv'ah for death of a relative, also apply on Tisha B'Av, the 9th of Av. Among those laws, Asur likrot b'Torah Nevi'im Ketuvim. You're forbidden to study the Bible, both all the sections, Torah, Nevi'im, and Ketuvim, and you're forbidden to study Lishnot b'Mishnah, Talmud, Midrash, Halachot, Agadot, all the various aspects of the oral law, the legalistic sections and the homiletic sections. Aval kol rehu b'makom she'en ragil likrot, v'shnei makom she'en ragil lishnot. However, you are allowed to read those portions of the Bible that you are unaccustomed to reading because they will not bring you joy, since you'll break your teeth over the words. And you're allowed to study those Mishnahs which you're not accustomed to studying because, again, you'll find difficulty rather than happiness in that study. But you are allowed to study the Kinot, meaning the book of Eicha, Lamentations, Eov, the book of Job, and the unpleasant aspects of the book of Jeremiah, because those sections of the Tanakh speak about unfavorable things for Klal Yisrael and will bring you only sadness, not happiness. As it turns out, the halacha does not accord entirely with this statement. Rather, on Tisha B'Av, we're still forbidden to read those sections of the Bible and Mishnah which are unfamiliar to us. Lamed Aleph, last page of Ta'anit. Shebahen Benot Yerushalayim. Here the Mishnah is talking about the dances in the vineyards, where the daughters of Israel would go and the boys of Israel would go and they would meet and find matrimonial success. V'chol Yisrael shalim mizeh mizeh. So the daughters of Israel would have these borrowed white dresses. Everyone would borrow from one another. Why? In order not to embarrass those who don't have any. That there are impoverished families where the daughter might not have available to her a white garment, a white linen garment, and so therefore everyone borrows from somebody else. And all these dresses required immersion in the mikveh, even those things which were not recently worn and had been sitting in the dresser for a long time. Why? Well, we can't know for certain who was impure, who had tum'ah. Therefore, as a safety measure, all the dresses had to be immersed. Megillah, Daf Bet. Menatzpach Sofim Amarum. The Sofit letters, the final letters of Mem, Nun, Sadi, Pei, and Chaf in the Hebrew alphabet were decreed by the Sofim, the prophets, the seers of Israel. But wait a second, how could the prophets of Israel tinker with the written text of the Torah? After all, it says these are the commandments that the prophets after Moses were forbidden from enacting anything new in Torah. Rather, what happened was the Sofit letters had been known, they were forgotten, and they were restored. So there's nothing new that's being enacted by the prophets. Rather, they're simply bringing back to what had been the initial format of Torah. Daf Gimel. Amar Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, krach in bo aser batlanim nidon kikvar. So there's a rule that cities have to read the Megillah, unwalled cities at least, on the 14th of Adar. Walled cities have to read on the 15th of Adar, Shushan Purim. However, out-of-the-way places, which don't have too many Jews, are allowed to read the Megillah on the Monday or Thursday preceding Purim on the market day, because the people who live there are liturgically incompetent and would not be able to do it on their own on Purim proper. So the question is, what size of a town is going to be nidon, judged as a kfar, as an out-of-the-way place, the boondocks? And the answer is, according to Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, any hamlet, any village that doesn't have 10 batlanim, 10 people who are unemployed, who are dedicated to synagogue life, that are not otherwise occupied with the parnasa, if you don't have 10, then it's considered an out-of-the-way place. It's a kfar, not a krach. Daf Daled. Amar Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, chayav adam likrot et Megillah b'layla lishnota bayom. A person is obligated to read the Megillah at night and read it again in the day. So this is what we in fact do. We have two readings of the Megillah, nighttime and in the morning. So originally, when the students of the yeshiva heard Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi's dictum, they thought he meant that you have to read the Megillah at night and study the Mishnaic tractate in the daytime, because he said the word lishnota, which lishnota could mean to repeat, but it also could mean to study the Mishnah. So maybe there's only an obligation for reading the biblical passage at night and the rabbinic literature in the day. Amaluhu Rabbi Yirmiyah said, no, that's incorrect. Rather, it's that you have to read the Megillah twice, nighttime and morning. And for example, like a person says, I'm going to read this passage and I'm going to read it again, I'm going to review it. So the question is, was this always the case? From the initial days when the reading of the Megillah was enacted for the holiday of Purim, were there always two readings, or was it initially only a daytime reading, and was the nighttime reading a later historical development? And the evidence suggests that the nighttime reading was a later historical development, originating roughly around the time of Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. Why? In order to strengthen the holiday that might have been waning at that time. And a liturgical hint to this reality is the fact that there is a Shechianu blessing recited both at night and in the day, even though logically Shechianu should only be recited at the first reading, which is the nighttime reading. So how can we explain this? Well, halachically, it's explained that the nighttime Shechianu refers to the Megillah, and the daytime Shechianu refers to the other mitzvot of the holiday, namely Matanot Levyonim, Mishloach Manot, and the Purim Seuda. But that's sort of a b'diavad answer that addresses simply because the reality is we're doing it, so let's try to explain it. But as a historical matter, we can explain very simply that the original reading was in the daytime, so there was a Shechianu in the daytime. When the nighttime reading was enacted, it became necessary to recite a Shechianu at night. However, in some communities, the daytime Shechianu, although no longer relevant, was not abolished, because sometimes what has been in the liturgy is never removed. It doesn't get excised. And so other justifications within the realm of halacha had to be essentially created to justify its maintained existence. But only in the Ashkenazic world is this the case. In the Sephardic world, the second Shechianu is not done. Daf Hey. Rabbi Natan Netiyah b'Purim. Rabbi planted planting on Purim. Barachatz b'Kronah shel Tzipori b'Yud Zayin b'Tammuz, and he took a bath in the public bathhouse on the 17th of Tammuz. Ubikesh lakar Tisha b'Av, and he tried to uproot the 9th of Av, lohodulo, but the sages did not agree with him, and they prevented its being uprooted. Now, what's happening here? Rebbe was downgrading the significance of nationalistic holidays, whether fasts or celebrations, at a time when relations with the Roman Empire had been improving, and it was a bit dangerous to overemphasize nationalistic holidays. And so he did malacha on Purim, even though arguably malacha ought not to be done on Purim. So he said, no, you can do malacha on Purim. He downgraded the 17th of Tammuz by saying we'll fast, but we'll do other things that are otherwise pleasurable, namely take a bath. And he tried to completely uproot Tisha B'Av. Now the Gemara was aghast. How could it be that Rebbe will try to uproot Tisha B'Av? And so they say, well, really he was only trying to uproot a delayed Tisha B'Av when it happened on a Shabbos and was going to be observed on a Sunday. So once it was delayed, let's just not do it at all. However, most likely that's not the correct historical interpretation. Most likely he really tried to uproot it. And why? Because in his time he felt it was no longer necessary or appropriate. Now, Daf Vav. Karuta Megillah, Ba'adar Rishon, with Tabra Hashana. What happens if you read the Megillah on the first month of Adar, and then the year was made into a leap year? It was intercalated, and now there's a 13th month, namely Adar Sheni. So do you have to read the Megillah again or not? The answer is, Adar Sheni. Yes, you must read the Megillah again, because the real Adar is the Adar Sheni, and the fact that you read it once in Adar Rishon is now no longer relevant. This question does not come up in our times because our calendar is fixed. We know way ahead of time when there will be a leap year, but in antiquity, they did not know that. The decision to intercalate the year could have been made as late as the 29th of Adar, after a Purim had already been observed, only to find out in hindsight that that actually wasn't Purim, and Purim has to be done again. Everyone have a great week.